Oh gosh, look at the crowd.
Come this way.
Those who spread goodness radiate happiness to everyone around them. Introducing LOLC Finance Credit Cards. Fuel the goodness in you.
You love the feeling of being renewed. To stay beautiful every single day. To breathe just like we do. Because you are truly delicate. Protecting the ones who've been with us through the years. With Sayalac Care, the only wood coating that truly protects you. Sayalac Wood Coatings from JAT.
Welcome to LMDtv. I'm Fazmina Imamudeen, and tonight with us is Geoffrey Alagaratnam, the former president of the Bar Association of Sri Lanka and the President's Council. Welcome to the show, Geoffrey. It's good to have you here with us.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here.
So the first question for the day is on Article 3 of the Constitution of Sri Lanka. It states that in the Republic of Sri Lanka, sovereignty is in the people and is inalienable. Sovereignty includes the powers of government, fundamental rights, and the franchise. The judiciary has been effective in its role. However, the executive and the legislature has clearly failed to accept that the power lies within the people, which is what the ARAGALAYA is about. How do you think this clash needs to be resolved?
Well, if you talk of it from a point of a legal resolution, what we have to realize is, first of all, we have had 20 constitutional amendments, the last being draconian, and we have sat by and let it happen. One of the things that the people have to realize is that we have to make everybody accountable, because whether it is parliament, the executive, or even the judiciary, they only hold office in trust. They hold it for the people. They have a solemn duty to look after the interests of the people and not to arrogate to themselves privilege or royalty positions. That is the first thing we have to learn. So my immediate reaction is, first get rid of the 20th Amendment. That should never have been passed. That's clear. It is a blatant violation of the rights of the people, where the powers of government are reposed in just one person. When you have parliament with 225 people elected by the people all over the country from all religions, all races, though everybody should be considered Sri Lankans, you find that they have been relegated to rubber stamps and just servile persons in parliament. 225 people at the mercy of one guy. And the judiciary also weakened by this amendment, where this one person who calls himself the executive president, who is supposed to uphold the constitution, can do willy-nilly whatever he likes. So the first thing is, there has to be not only a constitutional change, there also has to be a system change. That's why we are thankful to the ARAGALAYA. What we elders have not done for 70 years, the ARAGALAYA is doing. It has cut across racial, religious lines and is asking for a unified system where everybody can be considered Sri Lankans and where there is fair treatment and everybody is equal. Because what we have to realize is our minority is 30% of the population. So one cannot go on ethno-nationalism or religious nationalism, because one has to accommodate all points of view if we are to be a true democracy. Democracy is not majoritarianism, where the majority party call the shots. So we have to, first of all, apart from constitutional change, what we have to realize is all constitutions can come and go. But unless the people who work the constitution, like parliament, the executive cabinet of ministers, hopefully we will get rid of an executive president, and the judiciary are there to work for the people. And people have to remind themselves that these are not kings, these are not gods. They are basically our servants. That is what we have to realize. And people have to call for a system change, and we have to think, I blame the people partly, because we have given too much power to these people who are supposed to serve and represent us. So there has to be a cultural change, because you have found through the decades, heightened after the 1978 executive presidency came into existence, people being divided on national, on racial, religious grounds, which is unacceptable in any, forget a democracy, in any civilized society. Okay? So there has to, this has to be, and I hope that the ARAGALAYA change will go into the minds of all segments of society, not merely the youth, because as someone said, they have started it. It's up to civil society, the older people, the professions, to take it and run and finally seal it. And we cannot let the ARAGALAYA down. That is my fundamental thing.
Based on the answer that you gave me now, I'd like to ask, the present Basel has been hailed for acting preemptively throughout to protect the right to protest, which has mobilized professionals and legal fraternity to also support the call for change, as you mentioned. But this has not been the case in the past, where blatant violations of law by executive and the legislature were allowed to go unchallenged. Now, how do we, the civil society, professional associations, ensure that the rule of law is upheld in future?
Yes, one thing is sure, because it's not only constitutional change, one thing is whether we get our people to think differently. The Bar Association, as you refer to them, the BASL, is something that has been in the forefront of late. The BASL has had its ups and downs. As you know, every segment of society has its lackeys who play into the powers that be for their personal benefit. So the bar has had its ups and downs, but I must say that of late, the bar has been quite strong, addressing issues of public interest, rule of law, and though the bar is getting tarnished and slandered by interested persons to suggest that the bar is responsible for the breakdown of law and order, which is not so. And I think the people have to be vigilant. Democracy is not electing somebody for 5 years and letting him run riot. Okay? And that is why what is important is it's not only constitutional change. One of the things I always admire about Britain is Britain has no real written constitution. It has separate laws. But public opinion is so strong. And generally, it does have certain deficiencies in its democracy. You can't, the so-called representatives of the people are called to account regularly by the press and the public. We tend to be too docile. And it's time our people asserted their rights. But once and for all, we have to put in place institutions and processes. For example, the public service, the police, the judiciary. Strengthen these institutions and make them more independent and not controlled by the politician, because the politician has his own agenda. And so they have to be independent, which means whatever government comes and goes, it will dictate the policy, but it can't interfere in the day-to-day administration and corrupt the various public offices, whether it be the foreign service, the public service, the police, and the judiciary. So we have to call for change. That is why the Yapalana government, whatever its tragedies and mess-ups may be, where it failed to deliver, has at least put in place certain things like the Right to Information Act. It tried to set up the Constitutional Council, but it could have gone further. And that is a process we have to take further, because whichever guy comes in to represent us, because they always forget, because when they get power, it's just a question of looking after their interest. Politics has become a very lucrative business to them. So that unless we have institutional processes and changes in the institutions for independence, and the people think differently, they cannot be swayed by the politician who plays on religion, race, and security and all sorts of slogans. We cannot move forward, and I hope this ARAGALAYA has given us a chance to rethink and bring a systemic change.
We expect the same with ARAGALAYA. Now, the ARAGALAYA continues to demand that the president steps down more than the 21st Amendment. But can you explain what the 21st Amendment proposes with regard to the executive presidency?
At the moment, a lot of organizations have made their representations. The bar, I think Mr. Karujaya Surya's movement, another professional group, the Chamber of Commerce, and even a group of they call Direction Sri Lanka, professionals of doctors and various people who are keen on a system change and fairness, equality, and the rule of law and democracy. The 21A that has come in now doesn't do much towards at least curbing the powers of the president. They are trying to bring in the 19th Amendment, where there was confusion originally, if you remember. Two repositories of powers. There was President Sirisena and Prime Minister Vikramasinghe. Both claimed that they had certain powers, and there was collision which led to that 2018 so-called constitutional coup. But that 19th Amendment, from 78, everybody has promised to abolish the presidency. And even this president has promised. So did Mahinda Rajapaksa. The old person who may not have promised to do this, perhaps, because everybody realizes it's a cancer, it's an evil. So that the 21A, as it is being brought presently, if it doesn't incorporate the suggestions of all the different organizations who are given the input. For example, the president can appoint a prime minister. He advise on the advice of the prime minister, that is there. But he can remove a prime minister. He can remove a minister without seeking the advice of the prime minister. He can, for example, appoint a secretary without the permission of the minister or the prime minister. So he can bring any Tom, Dick, or Harry from anywhere, whether it is military or his private friend, and put them in as secretary, which means that ministry cannot work. Then, of course, fortunately, 21A is trying to bring the governor of the central bank under the Constitutional Council, which means you cannot appoint a lackey of yours to the central bank to muck around with the coins and the rupees. And so that there are certain positives in what is being put forward, but it's not gone enough. The ARAGALAYA cry is for the president to go home. He has been inefficient and incompetent. He has proved it, he has accepted it. So honorably, he should go. But he's not going. So we don't advocate violent change. But at least for the moment, 21A, to be very honest, should virtually reduce his power. And if I may say, should clip his wings and allow Parliament, which has 225 people, though at the present 225 people also have come under a cloud as being of dubious interests. That's a different thing altogether. But these 225 persons are more representative of the people, and there's a greater chance, if they are qualified and don't have criminal track records, and they are truly interested in serving the people, there's a greater chance that they will do what's good for the people with a prime minister who is not over-ambitious or ego-centered. So those are so that the 21A, in my opinion, as it is now, does not solve any problem. The cancer remains, as far as I can see, unless there are a lot of changes to bring more officers under the Constitutional Council, to reduce the powers of the presidency, the appointment of cabinet ministers and secretaries and the prime minister, and also the power to dissolve parliament. Why should the president unilaterally dissolve parliament? Parliament, 225 people are elected by the people. Yeah, one guy is going to send all of them home. So it should be on the advice of the prime minister, where the prime minister has lost the confidence of parliament. If 113 people say, we don't want this government, go home, then he is compelled to call upon the president to say, okay, let's go for an election. How can the president just decide that he should dissolve parliament? So if they are going to a parliamentary democracy system, 21A is not, as it has been presently, the bill is not sufficient. And it has to go much further. Otherwise, we are going to end up in the same situation.
So in that case, the Constitution has inbuilt checks and balances now to ensure that the three institutions of governance function for the benefit of the people. Now, how those checks and balances worked well in Sri Lanka, and as you explained, can you further elaborate on whether the executive presidency undermined that concept due to its power and preeminence?
Definitely, there was an absolute undermining, because with the 20th Amendment, placed all focus, gave all part of the executive presidency. They had the Constitutional Council or whatever it was, were just a rubber stamp of the president. He's not bound by their recommendation or opinions. And also the appointment of the Chief Justice and the judges is purely at his discretion. He doesn't have to go, he's not bound by anybody's advice or recommendation. Even his appointment of the ministers, king of the ministers and ministers, dissolving parliament, prorogue, is entirely at his beck and call. So it's clear that in the 20th Amendment, what has been set up is a one-man authoritarian rule, which you cannot have in any democracy. We are past the stage of kings and queens and dictators. And if we go that way, it's sad for our beautiful country.
It's a new era that we are stepping into.
Yes, because unless the 20th Amendment goes, and ideally, unless the president steps down, as is the call of, I believe, everybody, not only me, and we go back to a parliamentary democracy where there is a prime minister who is accountable to parliament, who also doesn't become a dictator like the president, and also a judiciary which is stronger, then you can ensure checks and balances. Then the judiciary will control the cabinet. And because parliament is essentially a lawmaking body, they can't be deciding how many cars are allotted and all these type of things. Those are for the cabinet of ministers. But today you find parliament only interested in their perks and privileges. I don't think they even contribute in any significant way to the debates, if you observe. So parliament has become just a rubber stamp for the president. All this has to change.
Thank you, sir. My next question would be on the assets. There are constant revelations with or without substantiation of unjust enrichment on the part of various public figures and politicians. Is there a mechanism by which ordinary citizens can bring these before the law? Can Sri Lanka use the SDAR system to recover such assets? How can this be accessed if those who are accused of these crimes are sitting in parliament?
Yeah, that is a very pertinent question, because you refer to select an organization like the STAR, which comes under the United Nations. Now there, of course, my understanding is that it is a government-to-government thing, where the government proceeds with it and gets the assistance of this UN body which has specialized functions to track these assets. Because tracing of assets, ill-gotten gains, is not an easy task. It takes a long time. So unfortunately, people think that if you bring back all the looted money, we won't have financial problems in Sri Lanka, because they think it is more than enough to keep us good for at least a decade. But bringing that money is not going to be tomorrow or day after. So it requires cooperation between governments. And as you rightly said, if we have a parliament which comprises people who have their own interests at stake, they are not going to pursue STAR or go government to government or the UN. Then I would think it's also left to a lot of individuals or organizations, because there is a fundamental principle. If you work for me, and if I give you a salary, and if you go and make some secret profit or commission on the sly without my knowledge, that you are my agent. Every parliamentarian, the president, executive president, so we call him executive, the president and the judiciary are agents for the sovereign people, because what we forget is in Sri Lanka, it's the people who are sovereign, not parliament, not the president, not the judiciary. So if any of these organs, any of these people have made illegal gains or commissions, they have used their office and done it. So technically, they have functioned as agents for it. So if you can trace it, you should be able to bring actions in court to say this money belongs to the country, belongs to the people, bring it back to the treasury. But tracing is the problem. If you have some very good sleuths who can get to it, because if the government is reluctant because they have something to hide, to go to the UN and use STAR, and since STAR is more technical, but STAR is very qualified to trace assets which are hidden in various countries. But if you can identify sources, or for example, you know that somebody who came to power who was just driving a trishaw has now got 3 houses and whatever it is, which he could not have got with his income, then you have to ask him to explain and say that these ill-gotten gains belong to the public. So you have that type of recourse in an ordinary course of law. In an ordinary court of law, you can impound his passport, seize his property. That's where the assets declaration comes into importance, because unfortunately, it's not well observed or enforced. Everybody is supposed to declare his assets prior to joining, and after he joins parliament or whatever, every year you've got to update it. So if it's not accounted for, then it is ill-gotten. If a house is not in your assets declaration. At the same time, if you're drawing 500,000 rupees a year and you have got a house of 50 million in 1 year, then you have to explain how you got it. Otherwise, it should belong to the country, to the state. So but unfortunately, these assets declaration laws and all have to be strengthened, and the bribery commission has to be strengthened so that they can go behind the low-hanging fruits where you can identify the assets. But international, where they park their funds in international bodies or banks, that might be a little more difficult.
On the same line, I'd like to ask, then what is the role of police in relation to, let's say, peaceful public protests in a context where there is no threat to national security, and it is merely the peaceful exercise of the freedom of expression, which the Supreme Court has declared to be the constitutionally protected?
The police is really, if you look at it, they are peace officers. They are supposed to retain the peace. They are not supposed to intervene unless somebody is committing a crime or they anticipate a crime. So freedom of expression, right to protest, as long as you're not damaging property or committing any criminal act against a person's physical body or violence, police should not interfere. Unfortunately, our police forces also got politicized, because one of the examples, the 20th Amendment, and you saw the IGP's recent revelation that so many OICs were appointed purely on the dictates of politicians, where they did not even have the basic qualifications. So you find, because of party loyalty or political affiliations, the police are either loyal to a party or a government, failing to realize that they are paid by the public funds and they hold a duty to the people, not to the politician. And that is why my insistence that we got to have independent institutions and processes like a police commission, where the politician doesn't dictate to the police what they should do, and we should have people of competence. Unfortunately, because of decades of political interference, perhaps the public service, the police, the foreign service have got so politicized that it will take a while to build confidence in them and make them more independent, serving the people and not the politician. So the role of the police should be one of serving the people, peacekeeping. They are not like the military and army, which is combatants. Unfortunately, after the 30-year war, the police also have got into this combatant attitude. They think that they are fighting a war, and they resort to all sorts of tactics which is not in keeping with their position or their role.
Another question that I'd like to ask is, what is the need of the hour? Like the president to resign, as is the call of the ARAGALAYA, or getting the essentials we need to survive? What should come first?
Oh, it's like a chicken and egg question. But I would think, first of all, we have to get our priorities right. The president should resign is a foregone conclusion. He has accepted his mistake. He has over a period of time, forget allegations of corruption, breakdown of law and discipline, forget allegations of ethno-nationalism and communalism, division, forget all that. On basic administration, there have been so many mistakes which they have owned up to. As I have always said, if you had a private company or any other organization, if you have made so many mistakes, you will honorably resign, hand over to somebody and go home, right? Because you realize that you have let down the organization, you let down the people. He's not doing it, which he should have done long ago. And if he is still trying to cling on to power, it's most unfortunate, because it's not in the interest of the country. But what is the priority? We see people starving. And there is also the breakdown of law and order to a certain extent by the recent 9th of May attacks by the government on its own people. So that we have to address the economic issues as a top priority. But I think without a stable government, we might be able to get aid, but to have permanent economic measures, you need a stable government. So you can't just cobble together a motley crowd of have-beens or geriatrics and run a government and think that we can put the economy on a steady course, because there is a long-term stabilizing of the economy, short-term immediate measures to get over this crisis, which will take a year or two. So I think the priority is the economy. But having said that, the president should have gone long ago, and the government should have thrown in the hat long ago, because they just couldn't deliver. They brought us to this crisis. So people realize this, but let's avoid people dying and starving. But we have to continue to insist that there has to be a change of a political system and the rulers, because the ARAGALAYA rightly says not only the president, all 225 have to go home, and I think the ARAGALAYA is right.
Thank you, Geoffrey, for taking your time to respond to the many burning questions surrounding the ARAGALAYA. You provided practical insights into what is possible within the country's legal framework. With this, we come to the end of another episode of the forum. Please follow us on Facebook and Instagram, and don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. It's good night from us.